What's up YouTube? Eric Vasquez here from Teach Me to Design. And today I'm pretty pumped because I've got an awesome video for you where I'm going to be showing you the best way to create a realistic t-shirt mock-up like this one in Adobe Photoshop. So let's jump right into it and get started. Alright, so we're going to just jump in here into Photoshop, and all I've done is opened up this image that I took of one of my t-shirts. Now, I just took this on a plain wooden background. I just placed the t-shirt on my floor. But what's really nice about this, and one of the reasons why I say it's the best way to create a realistic mock-up, is because you have complete artistic direction over your setup, right? So you can control the lighting, you can control, the angle that you're taking a picture at, and it just gives you a lot more creative freedom. So for this, all I did was position the shirt on the floor, try to mess it up a little bit so that I could get some wrinkles in it. And then I just stood up on a small step stool so that I could get like a nice top-down kind of view here for the t-shirt. All right, so once I've opened up this image in Photoshop, the first thing that I want to do is isolate the t-shirt. So there's a couple of ways that you could go about doing this. But what I'm going to do is see if Photoshop will give me a nice selection just using the magic wand tool and the select subject. So let's select our background layer and press Command J to duplicate it. I'm going to turn off the background layer then, press W on the keyboard, and then come up here to where it says Select Subject, but click on the little down arrow and choose Cloud Detailed Results, and then hit the Select Subject button. And now let's see if Photoshop can generate a decent selection for us, which doesn't look too bad. So once you have that, go down to the bottom of your layers palette and apply a layer mask, and you'll see that we now have a mask added to this layer. However, we do need to clean it up a little bit because you'll see there's still some edges in here where it didn't quite capture the t-shirt selection as clean as we would like. So what I'm going to do next is press B to get my brush tool. I'm going to raise the opacity and flow up to 100. And then I'm just going to use a small black brush to clean up some of these edges here. And what I like to do, and I'm working with a Wacom Intuos tablet, is as I'm brushing, I'll press R on the keyboard and it will allow me to rotate this image, and then I can just go back to brushing. So it allows you to kind of control, the angles and everything like that, which just makes it a little bit more comfortable, especially if you're using a tablet like this. All right, I'm just trying to clean up some of the edges a little bit. I'm just going to quickly go around the shirt and try to refine the selections. But of course, you don't have to worry too much. If you're working with, layer masks, you can always go back and add things back. So you don't have to worry too much about making any mistakes. All you would do is press X to change your brush color from black to white, and it will allow you to paint back in any areas where you maybe took a little bit too much off. Okay. So I'm just going to go through this quickly. I'll speed this part up a little bit, and then we will be back once we have silhouetted our shirt completely. Alright, so we've now finished our selection and cleaning things up, just using the brush tool to fill in this layer mask here, and just really go around the entire t-shirt and clean up the edges. Now this part is important because you're just sort of setting things up to make sure that it's nice and clean and everything like that. Okay, so once I've done this, I'll press Command 0 just to zoom out a little bit, fit everything to the screen. And I should mention that, if you are using a tablet and you're painting like I was showing you, in addition to using R to rotate your image like this, when you're really zoomed in, you'll also want to use the space bar to grab the hand tool and kind of pan around your image. And once you're happy with everything, you just press R again, and you can just kind of line this up until it snaps back into place. Okay, so once you have this, let's go ahead and make sure that you save your file. I'm just going to save it as a Photoshop file on my desktop. And what we're going to do then is hold down the Alt Option key, click on the adjustment layer icon, add a black and white adjustment layer, and check off this box here that says Use Previous Layer to create a clipping mask. Then I will select the shirt once again, come down here to the Levels adjustment layer, And then I'll press Command and the right bracket just to move that up one spot in the layer stack here. Now what I'm looking to do is to get a little bit more contrast out of the t-shirt here, right? And we're going to do this by just kind of bringing all these handles in towards the middle. All right, just kind of crunching this a little bit so we can get some nice contrast here. And as I mentioned, when you're creating your own and you have the ability to fully art direct your shoot, you can put a stronger light source here to get, more intense and high contrast wrinkles in the shirt. But for now, this looks pretty good. So I'm going to go ahead and press Command Option Shift E to merge everything together. All right, and then I'm just going to delete all of these other layers below just for now. We're not going to save anything. And then what we're looking to do is to blur this a little bit, okay? Because we need to create a displacement map. And the displacement map is basically going to tell Photoshop where to raise the image and where to have it sort of recede a little bit when we apply our graphics to it. All right, so first let's go ahead and just blur this a little bit here. I'll use a Gaussian blur of around 3 or 4 just to kind of soften up some of the edges a little bit. And now you want to make sure that you go to File, Save As. We're going to save this as a different file and just call it Displace or Displacement. And we will now use this to apply our graphic. Okay, so now I can go back to File. I'm going to open the file that we were working on before we merged everything. So you'll see that you now have your isolated t-shirt and a displacement map. Okay, it's really important to create that displacement map first. But now that we've done that, let's start to build on this mockup a little bit. So what I'm going to do is go to File, Place Embedded, and I'm going to bring in an image here that I want to use for my background. And this is just a free image from Unsplash that I'll drop a link to in the description. And I'm just going to scale it up a little bit, holding Alt, Option, and dragging out to fill the canvas here. I'll press C to get my crop tool and just bring in the handles a little bit on both sides so that your subject, the t-shirt, is nice and centered in the middle here. And then let's go ahead and add a new layer. Press G on the keyboard to get our gradient tool. And here you just want to make sure that you've got a solid black to transparent gradient happening. Okay, so the bottom slider here is the color, the top one is the opacity. So you'll see on the left it's 100% opacity, solid black. On the opposite side, I do have a color, but the opacity is set to 0. All right, so you're going to go ahead and do the same thing. And then just check off the reverse box up here and make sure you have a radial gradient selected. Click somewhere in the middle of your image and just drag out, and that's going to create a nice sort of vignette look for you. Right, it's just going to fade the edges a little bit, and then we can bring the opacity down to maybe around 64, 65. Okay, I'm going to come below my texture layer now and add a solid color adjustment layer set to white. And then I will just lower the opacity of the texture here a bit to, again, maybe around 64. All right, so let's rename these layers. I've got a vignette, a texture, and a solid fill. I'll select all 3 of those and just put them into a group folder called background. And then while we're at it, I'm just going to rename the very bottom image original, because that's what we started with. Throw that into a folder and just turn off the visibility there. Okay, so remember, you're saving this as a separate file from your displacement map. We're going to use the displacement map shortly, but before we do, we're just going to set up a few more layers here for our t-shirt. So I'm going to hold the Alt Option key, come down to the adjustment layer icon and choose levels. Let's add a clipping mask to the t-shirt. And again, I'm just going to bring these levels in a little bit to increase the contrast a bit. All right, I'll come back down here and let's add a solid color this time and maybe set it to a color. Let's go with this red color. All right, and then we'll change the blending mode of this layer to color. And you'll see that it's now applied this nice color to our t-shirt. So this is going to be where we control the color of the shirt. Okay, and I like using the color layer because it looks more natural, or the color blending mode, I should say. If I use, soft light, it's a little too muddy, overlays a little too contrasty, but I find that when working with mockups like this, especially for clothing, that color really works nicely. All right, and you'll see the levels allows you to control a bit of the contrast there as well. Okay, so let's go ahead and call this t-shirt base. And I could add a black and white adjustment layer, but I'm not sure I need it right now. If you were to take a picture of, let's say, like a green shirt or a red shirt that you were starting out with, then you would want to desaturate it before recoloring it. However, for this tutorial, you can see that I started with a plain kind of neutral gray shirt, which I think works really well for recoloring, right? If you're using a solid black shirt, it might be hard to turn that into a, you know, a realistic looking t-shirt that's a different color. And conversely, if you were to start with a white shirt, it may be a little bit tricky to make it look super dark, you know, with like a deep gray or a black. So try to pick a neutral colored t-shirt that you're starting with. All right, so now I'm going to put all of that into a group folder. I'll call it t-shirt. And then I'm going to just create a new layer here. And this is where we're just going to create our graphic or our, you know, type lockup. All right, so what I'm going to do is use a free font here called Against, which I downloaded from dafont.com. And I'll go ahead and put a link for that in the description as well, so you can download it, follow along, and create your own, you know, type lockups. But let's go ahead and type out something here. I'll just type out mockup in a solid white, zoom in a little bit, and we need to adjust the kerning a little bit here. So what I'm going to do is press T and then click my cursor between the M and the O, hold the Alt Option key, and then use the left arrow to bring the letters closer together, or you can use the right arrow to add some space between the letters. All right, but doing manual kerning like this really makes a difference, because oftentimes, you know, some of the letters can look uneven in terms of the spacing when they're next to each other. So you want to make sure that you're showing a little bit of love there to the type. All right, let's go ahead and make a copy, Command J. Now I'll type out the word custom. Do the same thing. I'm just going to tweak the kerning a bit here, just so it looks nice and even. All right, and then what we'll do is press Command T to do a free transform. And I'm just going to kind of stack this text a little bit to create a more interesting looking lockup. Okay, maybe something like this. All right, and then I'll zoom out. I'm going to hold the Shift key and select both of these layers, or you can just hold the Command key and select each layer together. And then what we're going to do is hold Control, click on either of the two selected layers, and choose Convert to Smart Object. And that's just going to make our text a smart object. All right, I'll call this text main. And you'll see why I'm doing this in just a second, but now we can move this all around together as a group. And by having it set up as a smart object like this, we will be able to apply the displace filter. And at the same time, you can always double click the smart object to come in here and change your font. You can drop in an image. You can put anything you like in here, and it will sort of be nested inside of this smart object, which just makes it easier when you are trying to customize the graphics that you want on the shirt. So our t-shirt is now set up. It's looking pretty good. Let's go ahead and go up to the filter menu. We're going to choose Distort and then Displace. Now for the settings here, I've got it set to about 15 and 15 with Stretch to Fit selected and Repeat Edge Pixels. Now you can change these settings and it will distort it further, but I find that somewhere in the 10 to 20 range usually works best, and I try to keep it the same for both horizontal and vertical scale. So once I click OK, it's going to ask me to point to my displacement map, which I have saved right on my desktop. And this is what we created earlier. So select that and press return. And you'll see that it's now sort of distorted the t-shirt a little bit, or the graphic on the shirt, which, you know, might not look great right away. But what we're going to do is double click on the layer. Let's change the color, maybe from solid white to, we'll use this like orangish yellow color, something like that. All right, and then we'll go to the blending options, and this is where you can hold the Alt Option key, and you're just going to split apart these sliders on the bottom where it says underlying layer. And you'll notice that as I start to do that, we're starting to see some of the shirt show through here, right? If you go too far, it kind of like disappears, which we don't want. But if you go somewhere in the middle, I've got mine set to around 100 here, and then you bring in the other slider a little bit as well, you'll see that it's creating a nice looking blend for us. Okay, and you can see the details and the wrinkles of the shirt showing through. So if I check preview and if I turn that on and off, you can kind of see how it looks before and after. So let's go ahead and click OK. And now if I move this around, you'll notice that something weird is happening here with the letters. So I'm just going to scale that down a little bit, right, and see how the shirt kind of looks if I zoom out. Right, and I'm not sure why it's like adding this little thing on the end here, but if you just play around with the size a little bit, it should automatically update and disappear. All right, if I go really big, it's probably going to mess up the M a little bit too much, but that's not looking too bad. And what's nice about this, again, is that I have complete control over not only the font or the graphic that I have applied here, I can go in and change the color of everything as well. Right, so I can even make it white now, and it looks much better than it did before. Right, and if I turn the displace on and off, you'll see what a difference that actually makes. Without displace, it just still kind of looks flat. You know, you can see the shirt, but adding the displace will really kind of change the topology of the graphic a little bit better. All right, what I mean is like it'll sort of be raised in some spots and then lower in other spots. So I'm just going to tweak the size a little bit more to make sure that I get something that doesn't look too distorted. But let's go ahead and double click on the displace here and maybe change it to 10 and 10. Select the displacement map again and see if that fixes the letters a little bit, which it does. If I go in the opposite direction, let's just see what happens if I go 25 and 25. Select the displacement, and it's really going to kind of mess that up a little bit. So I probably don't want to go that far. All right, but let's go into our t-shirt here. And we can now kind of change the color of the t-shirt, right? You don't want to go too bright, but somewhere in the middle here looks pretty good. You can make it kind of like a bluish gray color here. And again, now I can use the levels to play with the contrast of the shirt a little bit. Right, and then let's go ahead and put our text, our main text, into a group folder here. And to make this look a little bit more realistic, I want to add a little bit of a shadow below the t-shirt. So I'm going to create a new layer, press B to get my brush tool, and let's use a soft round brush set to maybe 20% opacity with a solid black. Right, and all I'm going to do here is start to brush in. Again, I'm using a Wacom Intuos tablet. And I'm just going to add some subtle shadows here, right? Just to like the left side, I think, to make it look like it's a little bit raised off of the background. And again, the nice thing about using the tablet like this is that you have pressure sensitivity, so it's nice to be able to have a little bit more control over the intensity of these shadows. Right? And I'm not going to do it all the way around the shirt either, just on the left side, right? Maybe around the side and the bottom. Just a bit like that, to create some depth. Okay, and now what I can do is add a layer mask and just paint out any areas where the shadows look a little bit too intense. So maybe like up here, I'll brush that away a little bit. I'll bring my flow down from 100 to like 50 or 60, looks pretty good. And then I'm just going to dial those shadows back just a little bit. All right, put this into a group folder called Shadows. And you should now have 4 folders, right? We've got our main text folder that has a smart object inside where we can change the size of the type, or we can change what it says. You save it, press Command W to close the tab, and it will automatically update back in your main file, which is great. Okay, and then here you can just control the size and the placement of the smart object. We can double click on the layer to apply a different color if you want to change the color of your text or your graphic here. And just keep in mind that if you change this, you might also have to change some of your other settings as well. So for example, I'm going to come in here and maybe just play around with these sliders a little bit more, right? Until you get something that looks pretty nice and balanced. And you can really tell with the red, like some of the shadow areas of the shirt are popping through nicely, but I'm still going to tweak the color a little bit more of the actual t-shirt. All right, so that's in our second group folder here where we have our fill color to change the shirt, and we also have the contrast. So let's go ahead and just play with the fill color a little bit. Maybe make it a little bit lighter, a little bit more on the gray side like that. Okay, and we can even go a little bit darker if you want. Or just see how some other colors look here. You know, it can be kind of fun actually when you're playing around with the colors a little bit, just trying to find some nice combinations for your designs. All right, and then I'll use the levels to play around with that and just to make the text a little bit more readable. Right, and that's looking pretty cool too. All right, and then we have our shadows, of course, which helps the shirt pop off of the background. And then we have our background folder with a vignette and a subtle texture here set to around 64%. And then you've got your background fill color. So if I take all these group folders and put them into a new one, I'll just call this Mockup. And now if I turn the visibility of this folder on and off, you can see what we started with, just this very basic image of a t-shirt that I took myself, to creating a nice realistic looking mock-up that I can use over and over again for any t-shirt design that I want. So again, this is how I would recommend going about creating a realistic t-shirt mock-up from scratch in Photoshop, because it gives you so much control and you have the ability to change and customize every little thing. But I wanted to show you the exact step-by-step process that I use for creating mock-ups like this. I did a tutorial on this a few years ago, but it wasn't covering as much detail and going quite as in-depth as we're going today. So I'm hoping that this is going to be a helpful tutorial for anybody out there who is looking to create their own t-shirt mock-ups. All right, and it can be, I think it's kind of fun to go in there and, you know, play around and change these things up. I obviously just threw a quick typeface on here that I downloaded for free from DaFont, but you can go to town with this and really do a lot of cool and fun stuff. So if you did enjoy this tutorial and found it helpful, please go ahead and smash that like button. Be sure to subscribe to the channel and click that notification bell so that you never miss an update anytime that a new video drops. Thank you so much for watching and for following along. My name is Eric Vasquez, here for Teach Me to Design, and we'll see you next time.